conservatism up until now has had a large Southern element to it.
Okay.
The what's that guy that Michael Knowles always quotes? Not Oakeshott. The Russell Kirk,
right?
And many of the conservatives of that era are talking about preserving elements that essentially stem from the South. The states' rights tradition is just one aspect of that, and I'm no expert on it. But there was an aspect of the Southern tradition that they're aiming to keep. Conservatism is losing that, and I think it's consciously and unconsciously losing it. We're, I think, consciously moving toward a Republican Lincoln nationalism away from the Southern philosophy. Oh man, that's actually very ironic given the opposition by the old school Republicans calling themselves the Lincoln Project. That probably deserves a whole article on that. But anyway, I think one of the areas that we're going to lose is the Confederate flag, or what's called the Confederate flag. And you actually agree with those who want to rip it down.
I don't necessarily agree with those who are wanting to rip it down. I just disagree with those who are arguing to keep it up.
That's a nuance.
Well, for the very reason you said, it's not called the Confederate flag. It's usually, in the circles that I've run, it's called the rebel flag.
Okay.
Right.
Or the Southern Cross or something, whatever.
The Poindexters call it the Confederate battle flag. Which really, it wasn't ever even used. Like it
was the battle flag of Northern Virginia in a square
form. The battle flag
form.
of Northern Virginia looked like that, only it was a square.
And also there was the Confederate naval jack, I think, which looked even closer.
I'm not familiar with that. Anyway, it was used during the Civil Rights era to oppose integration. That's what popularized it. In the 60s, Southern states say...
This is where I'm going to disagree with you, and this is where nobody agrees with me. What popularized it was the fact that it represented an aspect of the Southern identity. And those who were trying to keep racism, which is latent in every human heart, but had been a part of the Southern way of life for a very long time,
right,
who wanted to keep racism involved in the South, used Southern imagery to sell their racism. And so they wouldn't have put a black guy hanging from a rope on a flag and said, "This is our movement."
No, nor would they put the actual flag of the Confederacy.
Right, maybe. The trick with that is that the people's grandfathers who they want to revere and not call wholly evil, the way the left wants to call every historical figure who owned a slave as wholly evil, the people who live in the South who have parents, even some black ones who have grandparents and grandparents that might have fought in Southern black regiments, which did exist, want to not believe that those ancestors are evil. And so they did fight for the Confederacy. And they fought, and especially Robert E. Lee fought for a state of Virginia, which until that time represented a part of his identity that was greater than his Union identity. He fought for that state under that flag. So the flag represents Virginia for him as much as it represents a cause that he didn't actually support going into in the first place. But when it became the Union forces against what his state had decided, he had to side with the state. So with all that being said, the imagery, whether or not that connection to the Confederacy had to be there or not, represented what the South believed was their inheritance. That is why racists used it. They didn't use it because it had in itself racist elements that the South was rejecting. A Southerner who was against racism wasn't saying, I don't support that flag. The reason that the flag was a useful symbol, just like today with Black Lives Matter and stuff like that, the reason you have certain symbols and the symbols work is because those symbols are more acceptable to a greater swath of people than the ones who want to usurp it are. The Black Lives Matter thing is used by a small contingent of people who are the activists, but Black Lives Matter as a symbol appeals to 99.8% of Americans, just saying those three words together. Black Lives Matter itself, the symbol, has no Marxism in it. In the same way, that Southern flag does not have racism embedded in that identity. Or at least it doesn't for a person who is a Southerner today, who doesn't have a racist bone in their body, but who likes the fact that they are Southern, or wants to say, Jefferson offered as much to this country as John Adams or Alexander Hamilton. He was from the South. The South had a more independent character. It had, yes, that character, even its very character was mixed up in slavery. So their faux aristocratic mannerisms and stuff have a bad history of their own. But that character still exists. You go to the South, people are nicer to you.
True.
That is not all bad. Just like American history, it has bad wrapped up in it.
But if it were the flag of Virginia, that the
It is the flag of Virginia. Almost all of the flags of the states have that kind of imagery in it. The flag of Mississippi has the Southern Cross in it.
And they're talking about changing that, but no, like...
Well, I know, but even Georgia's flag or other flags have even closer ties to the Confederacy because it's not just the Southern Cross, which was only a Confederate naval jack. The stars and bars is what the Georgian flag looks like.
So the entire point you're making right now, if and I wish we knew the history, I forget which state it was that took the American flag down and raised the rebel flag up when the Civil Rights Act passed. Mm-hmm. Basically saying no to the Civil Rights movement. Correct. Right? And it was a reason why it wasn't their state flag saying, you federal government don't have the authority to come down here and tell us at a free and independent state what to do. We lost the Civil War, but we still retain some element of the pre-Civil War states' rights identity, mm-hmm. right? But that's not what it was.
Correct.
Right? And the Southerner who flies it at his, NASCAR cookout before the, whatever they call it, tailgating, before the race, isn't making
that statement. He's not making that statement.
No, he's not making that statement.
Correct.
What he's doing is similar to what I find funny and what other Americans do when they're discussing things with Europeans. They tease themselves about their own foibles as an act of pride.
Give me an example of what you mean.
How stupid are you Americans for still using the English measurement system? The English don't even use it. Why do you walk 5,000 and whatever odd feet it is in a mile instead of 1,000 meters in a kilometer? Our response is always, so how many countries that are on the metric system have ever been to the moon? Exactly. Back-to-back World War champs. Woo, USA, USA. And you just immediately go fulfill every one of their stereotypes. And they're like, Americans are insufferable. That's right, we are. And we're awesome for it. It's like, that's what the rebel flag is in the American South. Is it right? Yeah, that's probably racist. Northerners probably are offended by that. My grandpa would have loved it, though. Any questions? Let me wear my tank top that says back-to-back World War champs. Yes, I've got the American flag over here and the rebel flag here. That doesn't make any sense. They were fighting each other in the Civil War. But who cares? That is what the flag means. And that's what the flag has always meant. that it has always been a thumb in the eye of people saying, hey, there was a real problem before the Civil War, and we need to take it seriously. And the Civil Rights Act, you can oppose, like Barry Goldwater did, for very nuanced libertarian reasons, maybe. But you shouldn't oppose it for racist reasons like the Democrats that were in Congress did at the time. Right. And who all were Southern Democrats. Right? And so when the waving of the flag is kind of like it's it's the self-deprecating pride in.
But isn't self-deprecating pride one of the aspects of identity, a person's identity?
Yes.
I am a Southerner. I can't not be from the South. That's what I am. I have certain opinions that come from that. I have certain mannerisms that come from that. And
if the South had divorced themselves from the racism, then people could say...
given that the South has divorced themselves from the racism...
I guess that's where our agreement to disagree.
Okay, so you're basically saying anybody who flies the Southern flag, you scratch the surface hard enough, there's a racist underneath.
In my experience, yeah.
Really?
Yes. In my much greater experience than you, hanging out with people who fly Confederate flags.
Who? No, I can't. Because you can't name names.
I will not name names. No.
You scratch the surface, you find racist.
Yes.
Really?
And an awareness that people are assuming racism when you're flying it. Right? I mean, I'm not saying that everybody feels that way. I'm sure, you will see the flag and then it'll, be labeled heritage, not hate. But you don't see that very often. You normally just see it flying unapologetically.
No, you normally see it at NASCAR races, where nooses don't actually get put on garage door handles when a black guy is involved in NASCAR.
True. But that's irrelevant.
I guess I gotta just take the fact that you're saying what your anecdote is more than one person, because if that's true, then I will reassess my opinion on this. Actually,
it's more than 100 personal interactions
with 100 different people
over the course of 35 years of life. Yes,
100 different Southerners who flew the flag and are racist.
No, not necessarily who flew the flag, but who would defend the flag flying. And when you push, yeah, there's racism there. There are Southerners who are like, man, I would love to be proud of the South. I am really ashamed of the fact that even up to the 1960s, we were still fighting for segregation at bare minimum. That person with that mentality doesn't fly the rebel flag.
Well, okay. Oh, jeez.
And what you're saying?
I
is
think
had everybody in the South been that way, then he would have flown the rebel flag as but it probably wouldn't have been the rebel flag. It probably would have been the Confederate flag. It would have been like, okay, the two flags are opposed to each other. The Stars and Stripes against the Stars and Bars. The Stars and Stripes won. Let's bring the Stars and Bars under the Stars and Stripes. Had that happened, then people would see the two flying together.
But that happens a lot.
Is
the
reunited
place that
with...
you will find the Southern flags is a lot of times right next to the United States flag.
Very, very rarely underneath it. I've never personally seen it underneath it, ever in my life.
Huh.
I've usually seen it hung prominently somewhere where the American flag isn't around. That's the norm in my experience.
I've seen it fly next to it quite an awful lot, but I guess that is not good enough.
And so, but my point is, had it been the attitude of the South been I was gonna say national, but like a South-wide repentance, saying we want to preserve a Southern identity that is purged of our
Let me push back right
race
here.
history.
I get your point. Can I push back right here?
Sure.
Imagine a leftist coming to you and saying, had America passed reparations and had a nationwide repentance for its inclusion in slavery, then I'd be okay with flying the American flag. But since we have not, that flag is incurably evil.
How would you defend I haven't used the phrase incurably evil.
Okay.
And you would have to say, instead of saying the American flag, say the Betsy Ross flag.
Okay, why?
Because the American flag is actually the American flag. The Betsy Ross flag it's not the American flag.
Okay.
And so the left comes in and says, oh, that's a symbol of white supremacy and racism.
Because it goes back to the original 13 colonies or something?
Which it never did. It was a bizarre false accusation. But then a few alt-right trolls picked up on the fact that they're being accused of it and started flying it all over the place.
Okay.
And so a traditional conservative isn't going to put the Betsy Ross flag as his icon.
And neither is he going to is somebody from the South who happens to be conservative and have a lot of linkages to the philosophy of maybe Southern thinkers of not Calhoun types, but anyway, we can get into who those are.
Someone who has a personal respect for Robert E. Lee, who would argue in favor of keeping the statue up.
Right.
Right. He's probably not going to put a rebel flag up on his.
Right, but in the same
profile.
way that somebody's not necessarily, unless they're being a troll, going to put up the Betsy Ross flag.
Right.
But
And
even
it's
there's two levels of the Betsy Ross flag too, though. There's the alt-right troll who does it just because they actually do embody the hate. Then there's the non-alt-right troll who puts it up because screw you. You should not be able to tell me.
A double level of irony, right?
Yeah, you should not be able to tell me not to put the Betsy Ross flag up. And
How many
of
he's
the
really making a
Southerners
statement
do you
about
think,
free speech.
Yes, but how many of the Southerners feel are that way too? I don't personally think anything negative should happen to anyone who because of their skin color. But
You can't tell me what flag. Probably 9 out of 10.
Does that matter?
Raise it with that attitude.
Right, but is that attitude itself racist? The one who says I'm going to fly
that attitude is not itself racist.
Correct.
And the Betsy Ross flag is that accusation is like 8 months old.
Well, I agree with you that the Betsy Ross flag is a better thing to wave to troll the left because there's no actual racism they can point to in history that was tied to it.
Where the rebel flag, there definitely is.
I'm in agreement with you on that. But my question is not which should we do in order to better win against the left. We obviously should dump the rebel flag like nothing if our goal is to beat the left at a culture war. It should be gone tomorrow. But that's not what I'm asking you right now. I'm asking you philosophically and culturally as the people, if we care about what those people actually are and what they think.
I don't have a problem with Southern identity, and I don't have a problem with Southerners taking pride in a Southern identity. And I think there could well be a Southern identity that includes Southern blacks. And I think there was actually a move in the early parts of the 2000s for Southern blacks to take the rebel flag on as a Southern symbol in the hip hop culture. Like, it was really ironic to see, I think his name was Lil Jon, the rapper, put a big rebel flag belt on. And he's, talking about the rapping with the dirty South. It's just like, that's funny to me. Like, and it was like they mean South and they mean dirty. They're like, yes, we know Northerners come down here and are uncomfortable for a lot of reasons, and we take pride in that. The same thing the redneck at the NASCAR race flies it for. But it just didn't happen. The rednecks did not include them. Like, had they invited...
Who are these rednecks that you're saying didn't include? Well, I guess not a lot of white people are going to Lil Jon concerts, you're saying?
Or vice versa. Black people going to NASCAR races. It's really...
Well, here's part of the problem, though. When you have... Okay, so we have the first black NASCAR guy, right?
We had Michelle Obama give the countdown at Talladega or Daytona or one of them.
Right.
And got booed, of course. And everybody called it racist, and everybody's like, "That's not racist. It's just we don't like Democrat policies."
Right.
But there's just a whole lot of nuance to it. But I think there was an opportunity for the flag to become a symbol of Southern identity and pride, and it didn't work out.
But you're saying it didn't work out. 10 years from now, let's say the left wins the culture war, and they convince 52% of the country that the Betsy Ross flag is too tied up with the alt-right to be worth defending.
And this is 10 years from now?
10 years from now. They just completely... We have
there's a lot that there's a lot that could take place in the next 10 years that would either make that argument silly
would you 10 years from now, had that been the case, just be like, well, the Betsy Ross flag could have been something that was uniting?
It depends on what happens in those 10 years.
Well, my point is,
if there's a huge...
even if it does happen, well, why allow Northern agitators, or it's not North and South anymore. It's Democrat, big city versus... there's still some lingering North-South elements.
It's North and South when it comes to the Confederate flag, the rebel flag.
Yes, more than other things, but I'm saying that...
You don't have rednecks in Montana flying the rebel flag.
Correct. But both the redneck in Montana and the southern redneck are voting against Obama.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I'm saying is the political elements are shifting in the direction of coastal metropolitan versus interior rural as opposed to north and south. Should this new paradigm where a new left is coming out that is metropolitan, be able to tell their any inner city black communities, which have obviously a problematic history in the South, and the South was horrible to them in many ways. But should they come in there and tell them, you shouldn't wear that belt buckle because you should see the white people in the South as your enemy. That is what you should do going forward. And should the South be resisting that and saying, no, let this guy wear the Southern flag. We want him to wear the Southern flag. The Southern flag does not mean racism.
Had it not, that's exactly what would have happened.
I just don't know how you could have had that happen, given that the media is controlled by coastal elites. They get to set what the narrative is. You don't think there's people in the South, you don't think there's a black guy in the South who lives next door to a guy who has the rebel flag, just has always had the rebel flag sitting outside his house, who are best friends?
I think that's possible, yeah.
I think it's definite. I mean, the idea that that's not the case somewhere. I mean, you have literally, you can take any weirdo thing. You can just come up with a story like man eats guy's face. That happened somewhere in the United States. The fact that did not happen in the South would be absurd. But given that you have a lot of people who are interacting, and you have Southern church-going black people who get dressed up on Sunday, and white Southern people who are dressing up and going to church on Sunday,
to a Baptist church,
that have more in common than people let on, but segregation still exists. To have a common identity there is something we should be going for.
Yeah, it would have been nice.
I guess you're just saying it's a lost cause. I'm sorry, no pun intended. But yeah, it was crazy.
It's all anecdotal, in both of our cases. But yeah, I think it's. I'm not hopeful for it.
What if we got rid of the Confederate flag entirely and just said, let's invent a new South flag? No, you can't see. You wouldn't even see. I think the problem is that the people who set the narrative in this country say a Southern identity is itself racist. If you have an identity,
but
that is the South.
There's truth to that, but it's even more tragic than that. Is when people hear something enough, they start to believe it, right? And I don't think a single person who went to the Tea Party rallies in 2010 did so for racist motivations. A single person.
Right. It wasn't the...
It was, if there was any, it was such a tiny fraction that it was a rounding error.
Rounding error, and if somebody saw a person there who had a sign that said "White Lives Matter" or something, they would have kicked him out.
If the Tea Party guys had said some pro-KK message sign, it would have been kicked out of any Tea Party rally in the South.
Correct.
But the left telling the Tea Party over and over and over and over again that they're racist, I think helped lead to the rise of the alt-right. It's like, well, I guess we're racist then. Again, you don't think that happens with human psychology. It does happen with human psychology. That's what abuse victims happen all the time. They start to believe what they're told.
I have a different theory on why we have the alt-right.
Well, but regardless, I think that's probably a different question. The issue of if every depiction of a Southerner is racism and problematic is problematically racist,
you start to think that Southern identity.
Think that way of yourself.
Well, that all movies, the one ignorant person you can have, the one stereotypically ignorant person you can put on the big screen is a Southerner.
Redneck.
Yeah, right. Or somebody who talks in a Southern drawl, has teeth missing, and whatever. You can put on Southern face, and that is a totally okay stereotypical bigotry that you can just have. And you think that actually conditions people to see the South, or anyone who has a Southern identity anywhere in them, that's that knee-jerk, ignorant side of them.
But what's even straight, to add another level of nuance to it, on the other side, the Gone with the Wind myth.
Yeah.
And that, up until very recently, you could still see that. Like, did you see the movie, the World War II movie, Gods and Generals?
No, I haven't seen that one.
Pro-Confederate propaganda, the whole thing.
Really?
Yes. Amazingly so. Like, and it was not that long ago. It was like the 90s. The only black characters were Southern slaves who loved their masters and supported the Southern effort. One of them loved his master because he gave him his freedom, but it was all lost cause myth. And I think also of the silly rom-com with Reese Witherspoon. I wish I could remember the name of it. Where she's from the South. She lives in New York.
Sweet Home Alabama.
Sweet Home Alabama.
Yeah.
She lives in New York or somewhere, and she was daydreaming, or no, she had fallen asleep, and she kind of talked in her sleep, and then she woke up. Oh my goodness! And they all teased her that you have your Southern accent again when you dream, and she's embarrassed by it. Eventually, she goes back home, and it's all the South is wonderful, and there's no racism here.
But what era was that? I don't remember.
This was the early 2000s, mid 2000s.
Yeah, but what era was the movie depicting?
The present day.
So why would she find racism everywhere?
It's not that she would find racism everywhere. They do Civil War reenactments, and it's all charming, right? And they do, the South will rise again at the end of the movie when she punches her mother, what would have been her mother-in-law as she married the northern guy, and it's just that whole thing was, to me, who had a lot of experience with Southerners, it's like you're whitewashing it a little bit. Like
you're whitewashing the present.
Yes, they're whitewashing the present South a little bit.
Okay,
and the Southern pride and the Southern identity and the I guess they didn't have any.
You're calling it whitewashing. That's kind of a weird word for this. They're presenting a Southern identity free from racism, and you find that to be a problem. So basically, you're agreeing against yourself from before. You're saying that it's wrong, or so you're basically saying that to have a Southern identity and to present one, you must assume the bigotry that you were saying.
Not that you must assume the bigotry. I don't know what I'm saying. I guess you should acknowledge it to a degree, or.
So you're saying you must at least have one actual racist character in there to come up and do the Southern face, and so that everyone can say, no, it's okay to be everything but that bigoted stereotype we have. I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to at least say where I agree with you.
I'm not sure what I'm saying. I got the same feeling from Sweet Home Alabama that I got from Gods and Generals. My feeling might have been misguided. I don't know.
Huh.
And you haven't seen.
I haven't seen Gods and Generals, and I did see. I'm pretty sure I saw Sweet Home Alabama at some point. But where I'll agree with you is when it comes to depicting history, that is the problem. When you're doing Gone with the Wind and you're making the
it is different that one is history and one is present day. That is definitely a difference.
Right. And should you be? I guess I didn't know. I realized on this podcast I was going to come out in favor of Sweet Home Alabama. I don't know what this stupid thing is about, but the fact that it has the same title as the song. Oh my gosh,
I didn't even think about the song. The song is making my whole point.
Okay, go.
Do you know what the lyrics of the song are?
Sweet Home. No, I don't. I just kind of mouth it.
What's the first verse? Wheels, wheels, keep on turning. Yeah. None of that matters. The second verse.
Okay, second verse. What does it say?
I heard Mr. Young singing about her. I heard old Neil putting her down.
Okay, yeah.
Well, I hope Neil Young can remember a Southern man don't need him around anyhow.
And
Sweet Home Alabama.
Yeah, and you see racism there, or you're saying it's making your earlier point about pride?
What is that talking about? Who's Neil Young?
Another writer, songwriter.
What are they referring to?
I don't know. Which song?
Neil Young wrote a song called Southern Man, and it's condemning Southern racism. And Neil Young's from the South. And so Neil Young was saying, Neil Young is speaking out against Southern racism, and Leonard Skinner is saying, we don't need you around anyhow.
Well, but here, listen, there's two ways to interpret this. One, you're saying Neil Young is making a poignant critique of historical racism in the South.
Perhaps, I don't know.
No. I'm telling you two ways of looking at this. So one is Neil Young makes a poignant critique of racism in the South, and then bigoted old Leonard Skinner comes out and defends the Southern history. Or, here's the other way of looking at it.
Right.
Neil Young does what all people who have no familiarity with the South do,
assume
its Southern face, which they've seen on TV, and throw wild accusations about how racist it is. And then the proud Southern guy says, screw you, man. You don't know me.
It's actually a little more nuanced than that, too, because he says, Watergate does not bother me. Does your conscience bother you? That's a line in Sweet Home Alabama. So it's saying, so do you bear the sins of Nixon? Then I don't bear the sins of Robert E. Lee. Huh. Which is, I think, I wish I knew the lyrics to Southern Man to know how fair of a critique it was. But it's like, we're not critiquing Robert E. Lee, we're critiquing you. Your current Southern
But that's
attitude.
what the problem is. It's one thing to critique Robert E. Lee and then have an intellectual discussion about whether or not a slave-owning Confederate should have a statue. Just like we can have an intellectual discussion about whether George Washington, slave owner, who had teeth probably that came from slave, should have a statue. That's an intellectual discussion. The answer is yes in one case because of his significance to the United States as a whole. The open question is whether or not we should allow the South to have the same significance. But that's a totally different conversation from the guy who throws an accusation at the South saying, you're racist, everyone tells me so.
And that's, again, I'm not sure. It might be an interesting thing to actually read the lyrics to Southern Man to see what exactly they're being accused of.
Well, and it's also more nuanced because as you get back from 2010, 2000, 1990, 1980, and the farther back you move, the more problematic assumptions people still have. Like today, if you take a kid who was born 2000 on, doesn't even really know what racism looks like. They've never seen it. And
they've never seen it institutionally.
They have not seen an institutional incident. And they have never seen, probably 99% of cases, have never seen a situation where the overarching culture that's around them is not protecting them from racism.
Right.
You go back another 10 years, and then it's like, 99% chance they've probably not seen overt institutional racism. You go back another 10 years, and each time it's like they're a little bit more insulated from it. But the funny part is that the farther we get in time, the more false the accusation against the Southern people are. And so, I don't know. I guess you could also measure that fewer and fewer people are flying the Confederate flag, so maybe it does correlate with that kind of attitude. I don't know. But anyway.
I don't even remember in Sweet Home Alabama if they flew the rebel flag. I'd like to kind of go back and...
Yes, they did.
Did they?
Yes, I'm pretty sure on stage, big Southern Cross. Pretty sure. I don't know for a fact though, but I have that imagery in my head for some reason. The flag coming down. I think it was for Leonard Skinner. Anyway, I don't know. We don't know enough about pop music to be able to be talking about it. But anyway, so that brings us to, if we talked about the imagery of the South and whether or not they should have that kind of imagery, how do we feel about the way another piece of imagery is being used now in the current culture? For instance, the slogan, Black Lives Matter.
Well, you compared it to you compared the rebel flag to the Black Lives Matter slogan.
Yes.
Saying that, and you said Black Lives Matter appeals to, I think your figure was 99.8% of people, where the Southern flag, the rebel flag,
appealed to 90%
of Southerners.
Right.
So the small percentage of racists,
well, whatever percentage it was bigger in the past, obviously.
But so let's just say it's 90-10. Like say it's 90% of Southerners like the flag, but only 10% of Southerners actually were overtly racist and wanted to reinstitute segregation.
Well, that wasn't depending on what era we're talking about, that wasn't the case. Obviously enough to vote in segregation.
But my point is the smuggling in the racism through the Confederate flag is what you were saying. Like
the reason they chose it was because let's take Black Lives Matter. 50% of America is left leaning.
But my point is, forget the numbers for the rebel flag one. That's not what we're talking about.
Just put 50% for now. Like let's say that there was a majority of people, or about 50-50 in this particular era that we're talking about of the South that had problematic racist views. The racists still used an image that appeals to 90% in order to help their cause.
Right.
Same way. America is not probably 50% leftist until you add the media sanitizing leftism for them, but let's say it's 50% left, 50% right, and they use a slogan, Black Lives Matter, which appeals to 99.8% of people in order to help their cause. Yeah, that was basically the comparison I was making.
And I think that comparison's way off. Not just, ignoring the rebel flag aspect of it. I think probably a majority of Americans disagree with Black Lives Matter. They don't approve of that message.
So you're saying that more people in the South bought into the actual racism than today buy into the full-on Black Lives Matter Marxist program?
No.
What are you saying?
I'm talking about the 99%.
The 99%, okay.
That number is probably 60% too high.
Whoa. The way I'm understanding what you just said doesn't make sense. So say it again so that I
No. You tell what you think I'm saying because I think you do understand.
You're saying 40% of people support the Black Lives Matter as
slogan.
Support the slogan.
Less than 40%.
What? If you can poll that, and they have, and it gains support. So you're saying people say that they support it when they don't because of the social opprobrium?
Right now
that's radical to be saying. So defend yourself.
Okay, so right now we're five years in.
Okay.
No, at least. When was Ferguson? 2014 or 15? I think probably 15.
I think 14.
Well, whenever it was, the Black Lives Matter movement started then. We're 5 years into it, and the political left has absolutely won. They are just they have won. It was a blowout. It's not even close.
In what respect? Like electorally? What are you saying?
In the rhetorical fight over that phrase. When that phrase was initially said in 2015, more than half the country responded, "What are you talking about? All lives matter."
Okay, fair enough.
The left has won to where if you say all lives matter now, people assume you're a racist who doesn't care about black people.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
Even conservative commentators right now will not say all lives matter. The conservative commentators will say today, well, Black Lives Matter as a slogan is of course fine. Everybody agrees with that. We have a problem with this organization that supports radical Marxism. As if anybody cares about some organization that happened to be the first one to register that trademark. Nobody cares about what the website Black Lives Matter is saying. They're not getting money from a protest of somebody who wrote BLM on a piece of cardboard and is holding it up to a camera. That what that organization says in their list of 10 things that they support that includes things like dismantling the cisgender heteronormative America, all that nonsense. No, very few people who are out there protesting, chanting Black Lives Matter are saying
any of those things, right?
Or at least not to that degree, right?
Right.
The person who was offended by the statement Black Lives Matter and said, no, all lives matter, was right, in my opinion. The gut reaction of more than half the country was right.
Correct. I agree with that.
You just said it was enormously controversial.
Okay, the way you said it before was people support the phrase Black Lives Matter. So you're saying back when the left has won to where everybody has to kind of just, no, I mean, I'm not going to say that Black lives don't matter. So I guess Black Lives Matter is a good slogan. And what I'm comparing it to is like when a man goes up to another man and says, so have you stopped beating your wife? Wife beating's bad. Wife beating's wrong. What does the man say? All abuse is wrong. Of course wife beating is wrong. And you can't say, yes, I've stopped beating my wife. You've just conceded the fact that you were beating your wife. You can't say, no, I haven't. Then why haven't you stopped? Why are you still beating your wife? There's no good answer to it. Say spousal abuse is wrong. It's like all abuse is wrong. What is implied in both statements? When someone says spousal abuse is wrong to you, you're assuming they're accusing you of beating your wife. It's like all abuse is wrong. I wouldn't beat my wife. I wouldn't beat my kids. I wouldn't beat up a stranger on the street. All abuse is wrong. And so when the movement comes out and says Black Lives Matter, the implication is you, America, don't value black lives. You, America, you police force, you run-of-the-mill average Joe white person, you don't value black lives. You ought to. Black Lives Matter.
To which the white person who does value black lives, not because they're black, but because their lives, says all lives matter. And he's right. And the question is, it's kind of like the popular meme that goes around where the fire department is spraying a house, and the house is on fire and they're spraying to put it out, and somebody walks up to him and says, all houses matter. Like, that's what you sound like when you say all lives matter. Like, yes, that sounds ridiculous if it's true that there's a house on fire. But if somebody's just soaking this house, or like say somebody's just watering this house's lawn and all the other lawns in the neighborhood are brown, it's like, why are you only watering this lawn? All lawns matter. It's like, if there really is a systematic racist police force in America that is targeting young black men for death.
So basically what you're saying...
If that is happening, then the Black Lives Matter slogan is right. If it's not happening, then the Black Lives Matter slogan is a false accusation. True. And all lives matter is the proper response if it's a false accusation. It's like the man saying spousal abuse is wrong. And the man says all abuse is wrong.
Why right? Are you? And then he comes back. Why are you deflecting away from spousal abuse?
Exactly. There's a point. Like, you instantly become defensive and you'll say, okay, you're right. Spousal abuse is wrong. I don't want to be one of the people denying that spousal abuse is wrong. It's like, no, if you're not abusing your spouse, the proper response is all abuse is wrong. What, you think that only spousal abuse is wrong? Right. And so the Black Lives Matter movement from its outset was based on the false narrative of Michael Brown being killed saying hands up, don't shoot. He didn't have his hands up. He wasn't saying don't shoot. He was going for Darren Wilson's gun. So, Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. Darren Wilson's life mattered. Michael Brown's life mattered. All lives matter was the right and appropriate response, but the political right lost the narrative. They completely lost, and the left took over, and now everybody has to say, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter. What a good slogan, but we still don't say it because it supports this obscure Marxist website. Dumb. And then once you make that point, oh yeah, we just don't want to support this obscure Marxist website. Okay, so you agree that Black Lives Matter, right? So you agree we need all these police reforms to reform our racist police forces. No, we don't have racist police forces. Oh, so now you're back to all lives matter. Like yes. The point is, what is the accusation true or not?
Right. So you're basically saying Black Lives Matter. The biggest problem with it that nobody's willing to openly say is that it literally begs the question in that it smuggles in the assumption that
America doesn't value black lives.
Correct.
That the police forces in America are targeting black men for death, which is what the political left is saying. And if the political left is right, we should join the Black Lives Matter protest. Say, America's not valuing black lives. Black lives matter, and so there is a need for change. Right?
Right.
But if that's a false accusation, then you shouldn't say Black Lives Matter. You should say black lives, like every other life, matters.
What do you think about the conservatives who attempt to do an end run? Like my suggestion a while ago was the trouble I pointed out with the All Lives Matter response is that when you have a media controlling the culture, when you have a media that's able to create, it's not even just the media, it's all of the cultural institutions, right? Who, if you get to be the artist and you get to draw the guy saying all lives matter and draw the guy saying Black Lives Matter and create the context for them. Right. And so the context is black guy just got shot. Mm. And so now this black guy says, or this character says Black Lives Matter and this one says all lives matter. They get to make that look like a deflection.
Yeah, a deflection, and I don't value that guy's life.
Right. It's like if your dad came to you and was like, your math grade matters, bud.
Like, yeah, of course, all my grades matter. You know,
that's actually a really good illustration, because all that you would need to know
who's right there.
Yeah, who's right? You can't know.
It depends on the math grade.
Exactly right. Yeah.
If the kid's getting an A in math, then the kid's right to be defensive. All grades matter. That's why I have an A in history, science, and math.
And the dad would be, oh, I'm sorry. I was making a false implication toward you.
I must have been looking at your brother's report card.
Yeah.
But if the kid's flunking math, and he's got an A in everything else, so he obviously doesn't value math, then the dad is right to say your math grade matters. The college, just because you don't want to be a mathematician doesn't mean colleges aren't going to judge your GPA based on your math grade. You need to pull up your math grade. If the kid's flunking math, the dad is right to say math grade matters.
Yeah.
If he's not, the son is right to say all grades matter. Right?
Yeah,
And that's the question. And because the right just surrendered, the left now, the false accusation that there is a racist is smuggled in to the implication of the person who's just...
And there's very few Buckleys out there willing to challenge the implication on its merits.
Exactly.
And you're not even really allowed. And the trouble, and actually they won to such an extent that the actual defenses for America you're not allowed to say. So when you point to statistics, all right, how many are killed by police or whatever else, you're not allowed to talk about the crime statistics.
Right.
Because they've already smuggled in the assumption, once again, that any crime statistics you find will be biased against blacks because of institutional whatever.
Right.
But given that the left won,
right,
the reason why I don't think it's all conservative responses are silly. Like, for instance, there was one on the Verdict podcast with Ted Cruz and Michael Knowles where Tim Scott came on. And I think they mentioned it, but actually now that I'm thinking about it, I also remember it being stated on Don Lemon's show by somebody who came on, and I'm forgetting what his name is. But someone came on Don Lemon's show and basically made the argument, all Black Lives Matter. And given the left's winning and being able to contextualize you so that when you say all lives matter, you're the little kid with the bad grade who just is trying to deflect.
Right.
Then I think, as a person swimming upstream, as a conservative swimming upstream against a prevailing set of cultural assumptions not set by you, then the proper response should have been all Black Lives Matter. Because then you have flipped without their knowledge, meaning that they have set the stage for a fight between a guy who's saying all lives matter and a guy who's saying Black Lives Matter by starting and seeding all the assumptions, right? It's like they made a movie, gave that guy a bad report card, and then put him on stage and had this fight happen. Right. So you step onto that stage telling that story. When you do that...
And you've got 30 seconds.
And you've got 30 seconds.
So you can't go to... Let me defend why the all lives matter made more sense 5 years ago, and we'll build up from there.
Right.
Not a chance.
Instead, you immediately flip the script, and this is what Trump has been so good at, and why the media, one of the many reasons the media hates him so much, is because has an instinct for how the narrative looks on stage. He just has that in his gut. He knows how he appears on TV, because he has to play the bad guy that you kind of like for so long as the apprentice, the guy who fires people. He knows how that narrative's set, but a conservative, you step on stage in that moment and you immediately say, he says, Black Lives Matter. You go, yeah, all Black lives matter. As soon as you do that, then the other person is on defense the same way you were. You just smuggled in an assumption.
That you only care about Black lives that were killed by police.
No, you only care about Black lives
that are politically
that you
convenient.
have set up to care about because of it's
the ones that advance your political narrative.
Exactly right.
You don't care about the Black lives that are being protected by the cops.
Then everything it's kind of like when Ben Shapiro did that thing with the gun control to Piers Morgan.
Piers Morgan, right?
It's like you probably are going to send out somebody out here who's going to be some kind of sad story, and you're going to try to tell him that I think that guy should.
And you're going to. It was an accusation to him.
Yeah,
like it's not beneath you to exploit a child this way.
And
so he's like, I guess we should leave the kid in the back.
Right.
Because I will just prove him right by exploiting the child.
Right. And
instead of it being, look how sympathetic I am, now let's look how exploitive I am.
Exactly right. So he smuggled in the assumption by doing that. He says what he was about to do, this whole situation, was by smuggling that assumption, completely exposed it. So the person who comes in here and says, no, all Black lives matter. All of a sudden, the person who's holding up one Black life, when there's this assumption that there's all of these other Black lives dying, that he's not caring about because the white guy didn't kill them. That is powerful, I think, and I think it's
and so there's actually two things that does. Number one, it brings up the question of police, right? If yes, the man who was killed by the police unjustly, his life does matter, right? And you're accusing me of not caring about him because he's black. What I'm saying is his life matters, as does the neighborhood that those police are protecting, and your rhetoric is costing more lives than this one. That's one thing, and that's much less powerful than the other one. Which was used by a black conservative who went to a Black Lives Matter protest and brought up Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
So you want to know where most white people are killing black people? Tens of thousands of them in Planned Parenthood clinics, and you don't care about them.
I was actually amazed by how much
silenced.
How much that silenced them. Yes,
because most of them are actually pro-life. Like I say, most of them. Most people in America, even people who would vote staunchly pro-choice, will admit they want safe, legal, and rare is what the Democratic Party was saying till very recently.
Correct.
It's like nobody likes the thought of an abortion happening, even if you protect the right that it should happen. And so when the statistics most people know are way more black abortions happen than white abortions per person, and probably just in raw numbers, right?
Yeah.
And people who've read about it a little bit knows Planned Parenthood was specifically set up in black neighborhoods for that reason.
But here,
it's just the more you unfold, the dirtier it gets, and as soon as you bring that up, you've changed the subject.
Here's the problem, though, on that issue, and the reason why you can't smuggle in all of the assumptions necessary to make that as powerful as you could, is because the left that controls the narrative has smuggled in the assumption through a million different ways, but mainly through just our move away from Christian assumptions to secular ones, that abortion is good for those in poverty because it saves the young woman from having to deal with the consequences of childbirth. And Barack Obama himself, from his bully pulpit, said so about his own kids.
That punished with a baby, but that was a gaffe. I think
it was a gaffe.
I think it was universally
it was a gaffe in that it was too obvious.
No, what I'm pushing back at it's not a gaffe because it was too obvious.
I think the black community, a lot of it, just like white communities, have smuggled in the assumption that their poverty is linked to the fact that if that it impoverishes you when you have kids out of wedlock. And it's true to an extent. When you have children out of wedlock, it does impoverish you. But abortion.
The more abortion clinics there are, the more out of wedlock births there are.
Correct, but I'm just saying that is a case that takes a lot of nuance to make.
No, if what you were saying is true,
okay,
if that narrative had succeeded, which I'm arguing that it has not, that statement would not have silenced the protesters. Everybody in their gut knows, no, most abortions are for convenience, and those are black babies being killed. They all know that. And that narrative, poor communities need this in order to prevent them from having, the reason why it's a gaffe, I wouldn't want them punished with a baby. Babies are not punishment. Nobody thinks babies are punishment.
I think you are. I applaud, and I'm very grateful for your naivety on this point.
No, it's not naivety. There are people who think babies are punishment. Most of them are Caucasian people, and most of them are so indoctrinated in atheist nihilism that the black community would not even.
I agree, but hold on. I agree, but. I mean, what you'll find, and I remember seeing this meme of, I think it was something like, my dad tried to pressure me to get an abortion, but look at him now, or something like that. It was like some meme, and he's playing with the daughter, like now his granddaughter or something.
Right.
And I've never seen him happier in his life. Like, I think there's a huge element of that in the black community, of seeing life as a good. But and this is all America, though. the young ones who want to have the freedom until that moment happens, there's this gap, this window of where basically secular nihilism reigns.
If you were right, those 19 and 20-year-olds would have started shouting that guy down about how important of a right abortion is. They didn't. They were all silenced in their stand. They were silenced where they stood, and they knew it. And he pointed it out. He's like, "Yeah, you're real loud now. We're talking about where most black lives are actually taken in the country." Because that's just a gut thing. You don't kill children, for heaven's sakes. And if you do, you at least have the shame about it to say, safe, legal, and rare.